Texas Motor Speedway is supposed to be the straightforward race in the round of 12, but as we saw last year, lots of tire problems made this a marathon. Will that happen again this year? There's some changes we're going to talk about here on NASCAR America Motormouths. Hey, Nate Ryan here with Parker Kligerman and Kyle Petty, and we're talking the opener of the round of 12, Texas Motor Speedway. The only mile and a half in the middle round. You've got Talladega and the Roval after Texas. So really, this should be the straightforward race. But we saw last year, Kyle, so many tire problems. We saw records for lead changes, cautions, caution laps. We saw a 4-hour plus race. Here we see Christopher Bell going around, one of many drivers to have tire problems. New tire this year, but this is an odd racetrack, as we know, since the reconfiguration. So, KP, what kind of race do you think we'll see this year? New tire and hopefully not the problems that we saw last year.
Yeah, well, I don't believe we're going to see the tire problems that we saw last year. I do believe that. I think Goodyear spent a number of days there tire testing with a lot of good teams. So I think the information that they've got and the construction and the way they're going back, I think it's a better – I think they'll be in a better situation. I still think we're going to see a crazy race because this is the only standard race in this schedule. You got to make something happen at Texas. When we roll into Texas, those 12 guys in the playoffs have to make the most of this race. They've got to put the pressure on. If you go to Talladega, if you go into the Roval, there's that outside pressure on you to make something happen. You can win this race or come out of this race in a strong position, and now you're applying pressure to those guys at the bottom of the list. And that's what this race is all about. Who's going to be applying pressure and who's going to be feeling pressure when we come out of it. Listen, I thought everything was bigger than in Texas, but obviously it's not because we're going from 500 to 400. So that changes the race too. And the sense of urgency in a 400-mile race at Texas, it's going to take it up a notch. So, again, I think this is all about pressure and who comes out of this in the best spot to apply pressure to the lower teams.
It's well said, KP. And I think the thing to remember this racetrack is you talk about it being an odd one. It's just unique, right? It is a flat turns 1 and 2. You approach at a very high rate of speed. You've got to slow down, get that car down to the bottom. It doesn't want to turn. It won't want to do anything you're asking it there. And then you go off into a high speed 3 and 4, high banked, drafting almost as you come off of turn 4 down to turn 1. So it's a really unique racetrack that just puts a lot of emphasis on having to make some decisions setup wise and that sort of thing. So or compromises, I guess is the best word, but it's tough in that sense. And so I think going from 500 to 400 miles, you said it, KP, it ups the urgency. It ups the ability, the pressure on a race team to just figure it out, to qualify well, to be there in the right position for stage 1 points, for stage 2 points, and then obviously find yourself with the best track position possible in stage 3 because you have less time. And that's just a simple fact, right? If there's less time to get done, you've got to get it done quicker. Lastly, on the tire stuff, I think I have a confidence level as well, and I think the sport does, and that Goodyear has figured out the things that went awry at the last time we were at Texas. But I do believe, when we went into Kansas, I think a lot of teams felt like that wouldn't be an issue, and we did see some tire issues there. So I wouldn't say with 100% confidence that that's not something that will continue to just show up as teams push the envelope, as we go to these high-speed mile-and-a-half racetracks, especially one like this with 2 very vastly different sets of corners, that can't be something that shows up again, especially with long green flag runs. I think it's one thing to keep an eye on is long green flag runs with green flag stops and how those tires get back up into, the pressure that they need to be to run well. I think that's something that at least is going to be on crew chiefs' minds. But obviously, we all hope that that's not the case, and we have a clean race and can see a great race like we've seen out of this next-gen car, a lot of mile-and-a-halves.
So NASCAR has been racing at Texas Motor Speedway since 1997. And I want to go back to what you guys both touched on the race distance. It's the first time in 26 years that they've had a cup race at Texas scheduled for less than 500 miles. It's going to be a 400-mile race. Last year, you had a 500-mile race that was 4 hours and 21 minutes long. And I think that's not all the races at Texas have been that long, obviously, on the 500-mile lengths. But I think there's a certain dynamic or rhythm, cadence, whatever you want to call it, that develops during the course of a race, Parker. How do drivers sort of approach this? I mean, I know that they can just look at the schedule and say, or look at the race distance and say, look, 400 miles is different than 500 miles, but they've always raced Texas a certain way. Like, is there sort of a mental adjustment that needs to happen there, especially given that, limited practice time, they're kind of going into this cold, they're going into this thinking like, hey, for 26 years, it's been 500 miles. Now it's 400. How do you make that switch?
Well, first of all, I have to say that my first ever Cup start was at Texas in 2013, which was a 500 miler. And I remember thinking, well, that can't, it won't be that much different in Xfinity race. And I remember getting to about, I don't know, somewhere with some amazing amount of laps still left to go and being like, we're still racing? How is this possible? And we were having a great time, a great day. We ended up having an amazing finish that day. But I remember just thinking, like, this is a very, very long race. And I think that one was like 3 hours and maybe 40 minutes or something. So these are immensely long races. Obviously, endurance factor there with the 500-mile race. But I think it doesn't change a ton, right? You still have to have the basics. Fast car, a car that can go well on the long run, but on every long run, as Steve Assart says, there's a short run. I don't think it changes how you set up the race car in a respect in terms of how you tackle this racetrack, because that's not really how you would design a race car to think a 500 miler versus a 400 miler. You just look at what the longest runs are going to be, right? I think there is some strategy differences that can pop up, right? Especially in that third stage in terms of just how you tackle it from the pit box and how you look at where you need to be come the last portion of this race and how you dictate that strategy. But yeah, I think overall it just takes what you mentioned, a 4 hour and 21-minute event, which is immensely long. I mean, and just in sports in general, I don't know anyone that's going to 4.5 hour events. And I think, that's probably some of the incentive here to say, hey, maybe this is just a track that lends itself to really long races. We can do that. We can have a very long cup level event at 400 miles, but I don't think it changes a huge amount in terms of what you do in terms of setting up that car. But lastly, just the mental side, though, of course, it's just less racing, less time to race. You got to get it done quicker.
Yeah. And honestly, from a driver's perspective, if they're going to run 400, if they're going to run 600, if they're going to run 700, you're going to sit in the car and drive it. I think it changes it for the engineers, and it changes it for the crew chiefs, for the strategy, because you've got 100 less miles to figure out where you're at and how to make your strategy play out. So how will it change it for those guys? How will how will they adjust to it? Listen, when they went at Dover, when they went from 500 to 400, the drivers we were sending checks to anybody we could to say, thank you. Here's a gift from us to you. You know what I mean? Because Dover used to be that 4.5, 5 hour race, man. It just used to be. And it was like, in any other series where they run 5 and 6 hour races, they use 2 drivers. In Cup racing, they use 1 driver for 4 hours and 20 minutes. So it's phenomenal to think what a Cup driver has done when you sit there so long. So I think it mentally for the driver, it changes because you're sharper at the end of the race. You're more on top of everything. But again, for the fans, it gets them home early. For the crew chiefs, it's another headache for them, and the engineers, it's another headache for them. But I agree, you don't set the car up any different. The car has to be what the car is all day long, and you have to plan on that. And that's the strategy. And you come up with that, whether it's 400 miles or 5.
Yeah, still a lot of challenges here to work through. And I think good things can happen in smaller packages. So we'll see a slightly smaller package at Texas, but hopefully the same big level of playoff excitement this Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern on USA. You can catch it. The NASCAR Cup Series opens the round of 12 at Texas Motor Speedway.
Thank you for watching NASCAR America Motormouths, presented by Toyota.
Hi, I'm Parker Kligerman. For more access like this from Pit Road, be sure to click and subscribe to the Motorsports on NBC YouTube channel.